Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland, and in this video I'm going to be talking about German foreign policy in the 1930s. There's a surprising degree of continuity between the Weimar Republic and the Third Reich in the early years in terms of foreign policy. Well, so what were some of the common objectives? And that was to regain land that was lost in the east by the creation, or recreation, I should say, of Poland, and indeed to bring about rearmament. So to cast off the shackles, as the Nazis would say, to get out of some of the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. Kurt von Schleicher was the Chancellor right before Hitler. He didn't belong to any political party, but he was vaguely left-wing. And he'd been to London in 1932, discussing with the British government, would they see a way to agreeing to German expansion to the east, if this could be done peacefully? Might they let Germany rearm somewhat? Germany had stopped paying reparations during the Great Depression because they said they simply couldn't afford it. Now, the Western Allies accepted that as a temporary measure, but when the German economy was nursed back to health, they expected that Germany would resume reparations payments. So Hitler came to office in 1933 and he announced that they would never pay another pfennig in reparations, and the Allies grumbled but shrugged their shoulders about it. And the League of Nations, which was like the United Nations back then, had a disarmament conference. It was trying to persuade countries to disarm as much as possible. They thought there are fewer weapons, there's less likely to be a war. Even if there is a war, fewer people will be killed because there are fewer weapons. We mustn't have an arms race, as we did before the First World War, which heightens tensions and leads to a war. Countries saying we've got to declare a war on them whilst we have an advantage, or the other countries building up their armed forces, so we better build up ours, and so on. Before they gain a decisive advantage over us, things like that. Or we've got the advantage now, so let's crush them whilst we can. Anyway, they wanted to bring about tranquility. The League of Nations got mired in this dispute about offensive and defensive weapons. Shall we get rid of the offensive ones? Defensive ones will be allowed. So what's the difference? A bomber, is that offensive? Probably. How about fighters? Well, they escort the bomber. Are they offensive or defensive? Artillery, well, you could use it to defend or to attack. So they didn't get anywhere. Now, Hitler said that all the other countries should disarm down to the German level, because as it was, Germany was exposed to attack. And France in particular rejected that, saying there could be no comparison between us. We were the victims of your unprovoked aggression in the Great War, so no, we're not going to do that. So Hitler therefore had Germany pull out of the disarmament conference, and soon after that, out of the League of Nations altogether. Anyway, so other leaders had talked about accomplishing some of these foreign policy goals, like rearmament, but only Hitler was starting to achieve it. Now, you might say, but isn't that an internal thing? Well, it was in breach of international agreements. What was going to happen? Sanctions? War even? But the Western Allies, as Hitler would to discover, were in no mood to fight, and he soon reached the conclusion that they had no stomach for the fight. So it was softly at first, not rearming hugely, though they gave the army a huge amount of money in the first year, more than it could actually spend. But they didn't want to be too blatantly breaching the terms of Versailles, just in case the Allies responded with airstrikes or something of that nature. Anyway, so the foreign policy was expansionist as well as very militaristic. They wanted living space in Eastern Europe, Lebensraum, just to plunder the resources, treat people as human resources, enslave people, though they weren't openly saying that at the time. So then 1935, conscription was brought back openly. The Luftwaffe, that's the Air Force, that was brought back openly. It had been secret up until that point. And there was the Anglo-German Naval Pact. Germany negotiated with the United Kingdom that the German Navy, Kriegsmarine, would be allowed 35% of the displacement tonnage of the Royal Navy, because ship size can be measured in terms of how much water they displace, how many tons of water they displace. So that gave Germany something closer to parity than you might imagine, because, of course, Germany didn't have any capital ships in 1935, so all Germany's ships were going to be very modern. Some of the Royal Navy ships were decades old. Moreover, they were spread throughout the globe. The German Navy ships were concentrated exclusively in the North Sea and the Baltic. So the French were incensed that the British had not consulted them on this, had left them in the lurch as they saw it. The Royal Navy was the largest navy The French army was the largest army in Western Europe, and if these two countries cooperated, they would be a pretty difficult duo to beat. So that was the theory anyway. So then, in March 1936, Germany sent troops into the Rhineland. Remember that western area of Germany along the frontier with France. And the Treaty of Versailles said that once the French troops had been withdrawn, Germany would never be allowed to station her troops there again, because as it was along the French border, that was threatening to France, and the French did not want to be invaded there. So that if Germany misbehaved, as Paris would see it, France could easily invade this part of Germany, occupy it, or if the Germans did decide to invade, they'd have to go through the Rhineland, and that would be noticed. It would give the French some advance warning. The French had built up the Maginot Line just inside their territory, which is going to be a very tough nut to crack in terms of defences. Lots of underground tunnels, minefields, artillery emplacements, machine gun nests, many barbed wire fences, things like that, interlocking fields of fire, searchlights. Because if there was another war, the French thought it would be a replay of the First World War, as in trench warfare again. So the French had signed a defensive pact with the Soviet Union in 1936, and Hitler said he had to move into the Rhineland because of this. In fact, he was itching to do it anyway. He only sent infantry in quite a small number, not too many. He didn't want to frighten the horses, because if he sent in a significant number of troops, the French might misread this as the first stage of an invasion of France. If he sent in artillery or tanks or anything like that, the French would get very jumpy, but that didn't happen. France was in permanent political crisis in the 30s, changing prime minister every few months. If you asked a Frenchman in the 30s who's the prime minister, he probably wouldn't know. There was no French government on the day that they did this. They also did it on a Sunday, and the Foreign Office in London didn't know how to respond. Anyway, it was a done deal. So Hitler had to present them with facts on the ground. The German troops who entered the Rhineland did so with sealed orders. If the French were to attack, what do? Only then open the orders, and that was to provide token resistance and then withdraw, to de-escalate the situation, not have a war. Hitler wasn't that confident of a situation. His armed forces had not been rebuilt as much as he wanted. Some of his generals were very circumspect and had been advising him against this and other moves. In time, Hitler was to come to think that his generals were just institutionally overcautious and almost cowardly. Anyway, Churchill was a backbench Conservative MP in the United Kingdom, and he ranted about this, that the British government was being spineless and it must stand up to the Germans and not let them get away with this. People said Hitler's only moving into his own backyard. All he's doing is moving German soldiers into a part of Germany. So the Allies had more or less given up trying to uphold the Treaty of Versailles. The Nazis had tested the resolve of the Western Allies, and they'd broken the Treaty of Versailles by just a small amount, and there'd been no firmer response. So the German government broke it more and more and more, and the Allies were not doing anything serious about it. Churchill was not taken terribly seriously. He was seen as immoderate or reactionary over India, and perhaps his desire to stand firm about the Third Reich was just yet another example of him being a fossil, and even a warmonger, as people called him. The French encouraged the Little Entente in Eastern Europe, that's Yugoslavia, Romania, and Czechoslovakia. Well, Yugoslavia doesn't exist anymore. That's what we now call Serbia, Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Montenegro, and Macedonia. Czechoslovakia, that's what we now call the Czech Republic and Slovakia. If anyone invaded them, these three would help each other. They all had defensive alliance with France in turn. France had a long-standing defensive alliance with Poland. France had often had a defensive alliance with the Russian Empire. That was gone. There was a Soviet Empire was back. However, a lot of the French propertied classes were very anti-communist, were very chary about this alliance with the Soviet Union. Anyway, next step was Anschluss. So that's unification of Germany and Austria, who have so much in common, and some would argue were really one country. So so Hitler sent Reinhold Spitzy over to the United Kingdom to ask the Prime Minister what would be done if this were to happen, and the message came back that they would not fight. So anyway, the Chancellor of Austria was Schuschnigg, and he wanted to hold a referendum on Anschluss, and he thought it would be narrowly defeated. The Nazis were very popular amongst the young, and he was going to have people only age over 24 voting. And Hitler said, if you hold this referendum, I will declare war on you. So he backed down. Hitler demanded that German troops be allowed in, and they were, and they tore down the border posts. And they were greeted with jubilant crowds. Now, from that sort of straw poll, it seems that a clear majority of Austrians really wanted to unite with Germany. We know the Nazis were wicked, but there is nothing inherently bad about Austrians and Germans uniting. There are lots of other terrible things the Nazis did about the persecution of the Jews and so forth, but Anschluss in itself doesn't have to be a bad thing. It's the brutality was a bad thing, not the two countries joining together. Anyway, so then Hitler had a referendum held in Austria, obviously under his supervision, so it wasn't held on a fair basis. Anyone who was campaigning for a no vote was sent to a concentration camp, and they won by 99%. They started abusing the Jewish community straight away, making Jewish people scrub the streets. Political dissidents were sent to concentration camps. Now, if the referendum had been held on a completely fair basis, the pro-unification side probably would have won, not by 99%, of course, and the Nazis allowed everyone over 18 to vote because they knew they were more popular amongst younger voters. Now, being a Nazi and wanting unification with Germany are not the same thing, obviously. There are plenty of people who are not Nazis who wanted to unite with Germany. Karl Rahner, former president of Austria, socialist, and a devout anti-Nazi, he wanted unification as well. The Nazis wouldn't be there forever, so they thought. But Hitler had to reassure Mussolini that he would not claim the South Tyrol. That was that area which was formerly part of Austria, mostly German-speaking, which Italy had gained after the First World War. That's all for the moment.